The ocean was calm, too calm. Far away from the chaos of land, a silent giant rested at port, the USS Theodore Roosevelt. But that silence didn't last long. News had already spread across command channels. An Iranian strike had just hit an American tanker. Within minutes, the order came down. Deploy immediately. No hesitation, no debate. Sirens didn't need to sound. Every sailor already knew. Boots slammed against steel decks. Voices echoed through narrow corridors. Gear was grabbed in seconds. Helmets, rifles, combat packs. Men moved with precision, not panic. They formed lines, then broke into motion, streaming through gangways like a machine coming alive. Above them, officers barked commands. Below deck, engines began to rumble, slowly waking the beast. This wasn't a drill. This was war preparation. The ropes snapped loose one by one. Massive mooring lines, thick as a man's arm, were cast off into the water, each release marking the point of no return. On the carrier's side, the giant ramp slowly lifted, locking shut with a heavy metallic thud. Below deck, chaos turned into order. Crates of ammunition were dragged across steel floors, rations stacked, weapons checked, equipment secured. Every movement had purpose. Deep inside the ship in the anchor room, sailors worked in rhythm, chains clanking as the anchor was hauled in link by link. Grease, sweat, and steel grinding together. Forward section secured. The report traveled upward until it reached the bridge. A short pause. Then the command, "Clear the carrier for departure." Outside, tugboats moved into position. Slowly, carefully. They pushed the massive warship away from the pier. For a moment, the carrier drifted, a floating city between stillness and motion. Then, the engines roared. Water churned violently behind the ship as it began to move under its own power. The harbor fell behind. The mission had begun. And out in open water, they were not alone. One by one, cruisers and destroyers appeared on the horizon, sliding into formation like predators gathering for the hunt. A strike group, fully armed, fully ready, not just to defend, but to attack. The wind screamed across the flight deck. Engines hadn't even started yet, but the tension was already thick in the air. Crew members in colored vests rushed between aircraft, each color a different role, each movement perfectly timed. Fighters stood in rows, silent, deadly, waiting. Then, the loading began. Missiles were brought in first, heavy, precise, handled like something sacred. They were mounted under the wings of F-35s and Super Hornets, locked into place with mechanical clicks that echoed across the deck. Technicians crouched beneath the aircraft, connecting wiring, checking systems, securing every latch. No mistakes allowed. One loose connection, one missed check, could cost lives. Nearby, another crew inspected an F-35. Panels opened, hydraulics tested, sensors calibrated. Inside the cockpit, the pilot sat still, hands resting lightly on the controls. Then the engine ignited. A low hum, quickly rising into a violent roar. The aircraft trembled. Heat waves distorted the air behind it. On the deck, crew members signaled with sharp, deliberate gestures. Control surfaces moved, flaps adjusted, systems cycled. Every check passed. One by one, the jets were cleared, moved forward, lined up, ready. Above the chaos, one truth became clear. This wasn't preparation anymore. This was the final step before war. The deck shifted from preparation to deployment. At the far end of the flight deck, the V-22 Ospreys waited. Rotors folded, ramps open, engines silent, but not for long. From below deck, troops surged upward, boots pounding against metal ladders, breath short, movements sharp. They didn't speak. They already knew their role. These weren't pilots. These weren't mechanics. These were the shield. The men who would board escort cruisers and stand between Iranian missiles and vulnerable oil tankers. They crossed the flight deck at a jog, wind whipping against their uniforms. One by one, they climbed into the Ospreys. Seats filled fast, harnesses locked, weapons held tight across their chests. Inside, the noise was suffocating. Metal, wind, distant engines, all blending into one rising storm. The crew chief moved down the aisle, counting, checking. No mistakes. Then, a signal. Outside, the rotors began to unfold, slow at first, then faster, until they blurred into spinning discs. The engines roared to life. Dust and heat exploded across the deck. The first Osprey lifted, hovering, just for a second. Then it surged forward into the sky. One after another, they followed. A formation of transport aircraft slicing through the air, heading toward the cruisers waiting in the distance. Within minutes, those soldiers would no longer be passengers. They would be deployed, positioned across the fleet, ready to intercept anything that came their way. Missiles, drones, or worse. The shield was now in motion. The moment had arrived. At the front of the carrier, the catapults were ready. Fighter jets rolled forward one by one, guided by deck crew moving with sharp, precise signals. No words, only gestures. The first Super Hornet locked into position. The hook latched onto the catapult shuttle. Behind it, the jet blast deflector rose, a wall of steel shielding everything from the engine's fury. Inside the cockpit, the pilot tightened his grip. Breathing steady, eyes locked forward, then full throttle. The engines screamed to life. A violent surge of power built beneath the aircraft, the entire jet trembling like it was barely being held back. On the deck, a crew member dropped to one knee, hand pointed forward. Launch. In an instant, the catapult fired. The jet disappeared off the bow of the carrier, launched into the sky with brutal force. No hesitation, no second chances, just speed and commitment. Seconds later, the next jet moved into place. F-35 Lightning II, stealth, precision, lethal, hooked, locked, ready. Again, engines roared, signals given, and launch. One after another, the fighters shot into the sky. A relentless rhythm. Launch, reset, launch again. The deck crew moved like clockwork. Every second mattered. Above the carrier, the sky filled with aircraft, climbing, banking, forming into strike patterns. This wasn't a show of force anymore. This was execution. The air wing was now fully engaged. And somewhere far ahead, targets were waiting, far from the carrier. One of the escort cruisers received the order. A single message. Short, direct. Fire mission authorized. On the deck, nothing moved at first. Then, the vertical launch system came alive. Panels along the forward deck split open, revealing rows of missile cells hidden beneath. Inside them, Tomahawk cruise missiles waited, armed, programmed, locked onto targets deep inside Iranian territory. A brief silence. Then, ignition. The first missile erupted from its cell in a blast of fire and white smoke, shooting straight into the sky. For a split second, it climbed vertically, then tilted and accelerated toward the horizon, gone in seconds, then another and another, each missile launching in sequence, each one carrying a different target, a different objective. From the outside, it looked controlled, clean, precise. But what those missiles carried was destruction measured in seconds. Hundreds of miles away, they would strike military installations, equipment depots, command centers, and anything standing in their path. Back on the cruiser, the launch tubes emptied. Smoke drifted across the deck. The job was done, but the mission was far from over, because now the sky would take over. The sky ahead was no longer friendly. An F-18 Super Hornet pushed forward, crossing an invisible line on the map. Enemy territory. Inside the cockpit, everything narrowed down to one thing: the mission. The pilot's eyes scanned the display. Targeting systems locked onto the terrain below. Earlier strikes had already weakened Iranian air defenses, but that didn't mean safe. It just meant less time to react. On the screen, shapes began to form. Vehicles, equipment, defensive positions, confirmed targets. The pilot selected one. Locked. A soft tone echoed in the headset. Target acquired. No hesitation. The trigger was pressed. A guided munition dropped cleanly from the wing, falling fast, silent, precise. Seconds later, impact. A flash of fire erupted below. The target, gone. The jet banked sharply. Another target appeared. Lock, release. To hit, again and again. Each strike calculated. Each movement controlled. No wasted motion. No wasted time. This wasn't chaos. This was methodical destruction. As the last weapon left the aircraft, the pilot pulled up, climbing away from the battlefield. Fuel running low. Payload empty. Mission complete. For now. Behind him, smoke rose from the ground. Ahead of him, the carrier waited, ready to rearm, refuel, and send him back again. Because this was only the beginning. Far out at sea, the carrier group held its position, engines humming, radars spinning, weapons still armed. On the flight deck, nothing slowed down. Jets that had just landed were already being serviced. Fuel lines connected, weapons reloaded, systems reset. Pilots stepped out, only to be replaced minutes later. No rest, no pause. Because the cycle never stopped. Launch, strike, return, repeat. In the command center, screens flickered with live data. Satellite feeds, radar sweeps, battlefield updates. New targets were already being marked, new missions already being assigned. Somewhere in the distance, more missiles were on standby. More aircraft were preparing to take off. And far beyond the horizon, the consequences of this operation were just beginning to unfold. This wasn't a single strike. This wasn't a warning. And this was escalation. A chain reaction that could pull an entire region into conflict. And as the sun slowly disappeared beneath the ocean, one thing became clear. The war machine had been activated, and once it starts, it doesn't stop easily.